Hi everyone, Rick here again. You know, pastors are not God. We know that. Everyone knows that. But we treat them like God. And you say, well, how do we treat them like God? Well, we do. And I'm going to start off with a little disclaimer here. The Lord has given me this knowledge a long time ago, but has always prevented me from speaking about it. And one of the reasons is because of my personal experiences with different pastors over the years. Some of them have been very negative and have left a lot of bitterness in my heart. One experience, well, a combination of two experiences, I should say, led me to backslide for like 15 years. And they didn't cause me to do it. I decided to do it. So I'm not putting it on them. It's me who did it, not them. Because God showed me specifically that He's with me even though they were not. And I ignored God. So don't use pastors or churches as an excuse to turn away from God. I know I said that in a previous video, and I'm saying that again because it is vitally important. A lot of people won't have anything to do with churches or with God because of a pastor or because of a church. Okay? Now, having said all of that, let's look at why there's such problems and dilemmas with pastors. We, as congregational members, expect our pastors to be teachers. We expect them to have the knowledge we don't have. We expect them to be smarter than we are, more academic than we are. We expect them to oversee and govern the church in an administrative role. We expect them to oversee the treasury and approve choir songs and disbursements of monies. We expect the pastors to make final decisions in all sorts of things involving the church in a material, worldly way. And we expect our pastors, depending on the denomination and the belief of the particular churches, to be prophets. We expect our pastors to speak in tongues. We expect our pastors to heal. We expect our pastors all to have humility. And we expect our pastors to be available to our needs 24 hours a day. Gosh, it's no wonder pastors get burned out. And part also of the problem is pastors expect that of themselves. Because of their history, because of their teaching in the seminaries, what they learned, because of maybe churches they belonged to before they became pastors. That is the examples they have. And so they know that being a pastor means that they are required to do all these things. Well, no, they're not. The Bible specifically tells us that God gives each their own gifts. Some He gives one thing, some He gives another. He does not expect any one person to have all or a majority of these gifts. But we expect our pastors, and our pastors expect it of themselves. And this holds true to all church leaders, elders, deacons, choir directors, bishops, priests, superintendents, whatever you want to call your church leaders. And this has been going on since very much the very beginning. If you read the epistles carefully with this knowledge through the Spirit, you will see that many of the epistles and many of the apostles address this very issue. The epistle of Jude is so, if you read it just on the surface, it just seems so much condemnation toward non-Christians who are trying to infiltrate the ranks and divide the church and the community. Well, Jude and the other apostles are talking from the Spirit's perspective. They're seeing this in the Spirit. And they're talking about actual Christians who have received the gift of the Holy Spirit and have turned away from it. Actual Christians who believe a deception and sincerely believe in their hearts are serving God, but are actually serving the prince of this world. That's who these people are talking about. And when you get a spiritually filled pastor, a pastor who has genuinely embraced Christ and who is living in the nature of God through Christ by the power of the Holy Spirit, that pastor's teachings are just as credible as Paul's teachings. We hold Paul, Peter, and James, all of them, up on pedestals. And I've heard it said, well, you think you're as good as Paul? No, I think I'm as bad as Paul. Paul would never say he was good. Any goodness that came out of Paul was out of the Holy Spirit, out of Christ in him. Any goodness in any pastor or any Christian whatsoever is coming from the goodness of Christ in them through the Holy Spirit. Can you imagine if you had a spirit-filled pastor and one of their writings, and say 200-300 years, is attached to the Bible and held with the same reverence as the epistles of Paul? The pastor would be aghast. Paul, I'm willing to bet, would be shocked, because he taught out of the law, out of the Torah. All of them taught out of the law from the Holy Spirit, because the Holy Spirit gave them the interpretation of that law. And Paul totally rejected all the interpretation of his teachings that he learned from the Jewish elders in his training as a Pharisee. So when we look at our pastors, we need to help encourage our pastors to be as spiritual as they're trying to encourage us. Pastors, you need to be humble enough to be reproved by your congregation. I don't know how many times I've seen a pastor reproved by someone, and the pastor, in false humility, he thinks he's being humble because he's being quiet and nodding and listening and understanding, and said, well, let's go pray about it, and we'll come back next week and discuss it more. When his intent is nothing more than to let his congregational member, whoever it was who was reproving him, pray and read, and then when they come back, he will continue to tell them why they are wrong. I've seen that. If you cannot be in that humility to pray over something that someone tells you, and you're not a pastor, you're a ruler, you're lording over them. And we were specifically instructed by Christ not to lord over each other. We are to become less than them if we seek to become greater. He's telling us spiritually we are less than them if we seek to be worldly over them. We are told to be humble and submit to each other. And that includes pastors and elders and deacons. If you can't submit to your congregational member, then you're not listening to the Spirit. You need to go into prayer to the Spirit. And those in the congregation, if you can't go to the Holy Spirit and you have to call your pastor every time you stub your toe, then you need to pray more for knowledge and teaching of the Holy Spirit. The pastor's job is to open that door for you so you can learn to hear the Spirit and listen to the Spirit and act out of the nature and desires of God through the Holy Spirit in you. That's the pastor's job. His job isn't to sit there and tell you what you should and should not do. And pastors should not think their job is to sit and tell you what you should and should not do. I could probably tell you a dozen stories and be on here another 10 minutes of things I've seen from pastors. Good, loving pastors who truly and sincerely love God and really want to serve Him. They are over the church in a worldly way, but they are not over you spiritually. If Christ tells you something through the Holy Spirit, and I don't mean you're going to get a vision. You might, but when the Holy Spirit speaks to you, it's going to be through your heart and in your mind. You're going to just know something. Regardless of why you know it or how you know it, you don't know. You just know it. And you know that's the Holy Spirit speaking it to you. And if it goes against the teaching or doctrine of the pastor, who are you going to listen to? I was asked to leave a church once because I didn't listen to the pastor. I tried to tell him what the Holy Spirit showed me, and he wouldn't accept it. You know what? He told me, if it says it in the Bible, you just do it. You don't need to pray about it. You're just taking the Holy Spirit out of the equation when you do that, when you think that way. The Bible is not a rule book, and it is not to be used as a rule book. It is there to teach and open that door to Christ in us. Honor your pastor does not mean doing everything he tells you. Honoring your pastor means, if your pastor is truly in the Spirit, truly exhibiting that nature of Christ, you honor him by learning to listen to the Spirit and exhibiting that same nature within you. Just like a child who gets an award honors their father and mother, their parents. So, anyway, put your pastors in perspective. Do not idolize them. Do not idolize the Bible. Do not idolize the church or your denomination. They are not objects of idolatry or worship. You may say you're not. You're worshiping God by showing respect to them. But are you? You have to ask yourself that. And always question yourself. Always critique. Until next time, God bless.